getting autoimmune disease in remission, which I see all the time. There's some conditions that are too far gone that are hard to reverse, but remission is possible. I really believe in this innate intelligence of the body, that when you give it the right things and you remove the things that are not working,
Mm-hmm.
especially survival mode, especially foods that are not nourishing, it's possible to reverse these conditions.
All right, friends, we're back for part 2 of our chat with Dr. Sara Szal. We had an incredible conversation in part 1 about cortisol and how cortisol needs to be measured and what it says about your different symptoms you've been having and the things that you need to address before your cortisol crashes into an autoimmune disease, and the steps that you can take, especially if you have high cortisol. In this episode, we'll get into what you do if you have low cortisol and a little bit more about how trauma helps create or lead to some of these autoimmune diseases as well. Dr. Szal, thank you so much for sticking around for part 2 of this. We didn't get into what you do if you have low cortisol, so I want to make sure for our friends who are now all probably ordering a test, and if you have a test that you suggest everybody order to do this at home themselves, please share.
Low cortisol is sometimes difficult to figure out. So, what I advise is that you test, don't guess. Some people use questionnaires to figure out if they've got low cortisol. They feel, tired but wired. They've got, the sense of fatigue, and maybe you've got a history of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. But I would say test, don't guess. The kind of test that I recommend is called a Dutch test. It's the one that I use in every single patient, whether that's a NBA player or a celebrity or a perimenopausal woman. So what I like about that test is it looks at 5 different cortisol levels over the course of the day, especially if you're someone who wakes up in the middle of the night. It's really important to check a cortisol and a melatonin at that point.
Ooh.
So Dutch Plus is what I advise. And, even professional athletes that you think are, at the pinnacle of physical majesty, they have cortisol problems because they're flying around to do these games around the country. So you want to test. What do you do about it? Once you recognize it, you want to then look for what we call micronutrient deficiencies. So people who've been in chronic stress, that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response for a long time, they tend to get depleted in certain things, like B vitamins. Stress increases your need of B vitamins,
Mm-hmm.
especially B6, B9, B12. You also want typically more vitamin C. So vitamin C it helps to raise progesterone levels, which both men and women need. Magnesium often is low, and we see that in about 80% of Americans. So you can do blood testing to look at these things. What I tend to run in my patients is either a NutrEval or a metabolomics test, which is functional medicine testing. But you can also measure B vitamins and so forth in your blood. What I do next is there are certain herbal therapies that can be helpful. So licorice is one of the old, long-standing treatments that we use. You just have to be careful that it doesn't raise blood pressure. Typically, people with low cortisol are the low blood pressure types. Yeah, and so they're the ones who go to the doctor and the doctor says, "Oh, you're 90 over 60, 100 over 65. You're great." No, check that person for low cortisol. It's really important because if you don't have, cortisol is what gets you ready to fight or flight. It raises your blood pressure, it raises your heart rate. So if you're someone with low blood pressure, you have to be really careful because you might be more likely to faint. So licorice will help to address the low cortisol, but it can also raise your blood pressure too much. So you want to find that Goldilocks position, somewhere around 100 to 120 over 60 to 70. That's kind of the perfect level of blood pressure.
Yeah, I
The other
think
thing
what
that's
happens in
helpful,
medicine is they're used to seeing people who are overweight or really high this or really high that. So when they see someone low, they're like, whoa, this is a unicorn.
right? They get so excited and they don't think about the root cause. And it's that root cause thinking that I really want to encourage our listeners and viewers to have, because your doctor's not going to do it for you. You know, how
Hmm.
much time do you spend with your doctor? Maybe 7 to 15 minutes once or twice a year. They're not going to know you like you know you.
Yep. We talk about it
Really
all the time.
important.
You have to be the CEO of your health.
Yes, ma'am. And then grapefruit juice is another thing that helps. You just have to be kind of careful. I'm someone who can't have too much grapefruit because it's it can raise my blood sugar,
Mm.
probably because of all those years of high cortisol. So grapefruit juice is another thing you can try. And then some anti-aging doctors prescribe cortisol, hydrocortisone. I'm not a fan of that. I would rather address the root cause rather than use a pharmaceutical to, work around it.
Yeah. Well, also, you know, your body probably would get used to that and need it consistently, right?
That's right. So you get adjusted to it, and then anytime you have a stressful situation like a car accident or a surgery, you then have to take stress dose corticosteroids. So I'd rather avoid that. I'd rather work with the intelligence of the body to get it to work for you instead of against you.
Are there any supplements? Like, I feel like when you had high cortisol, there were a few supplements you were able to take. Are there supplements that you can take if you have low cortisol?
So the supplements are the B vitamins. So
Mm.
taking a
Or the
stress level
magnesium?
of B vitamins, vitamin C, magnesium, and then licorice is a supplement.
Oh, maybe I'm going to take the licorice. I do take the magnesium. Probably should get on some vitamin C. But yeah,
Well,
it's
check
so
your levels,
fascinating.
Maria. Check your levels to see if you're missing anything. I mean, if you're someone who eats a really healthy diet, you might not be missing some of these nutrients. So this is another place where you want to test.
Yeah, it's such a great point because it's funny. I was at Jessica Alba's the other night and we were talking about some health stuff and everyone's like, "What are you taking? What are you taking?" I'm like, "No, no, no. You guys need to like work with somebody because what I'm taking is for me and because of
That's
my
right.
issues. You can't just assume." And the problem is a lot of us all want to just rush and do or and I know people trust me because they're like I do know a lot, but I'm like, no, no, no. Everybody's different. Everybody shouldn't be on methyl blue. Everybody shouldn't be on some of these things that I'm on. I'm on them for a specific reason. So it is a nice reminder. I always think, oh, vitamin C is pretty nebulous, so it's not going to be a bad thing to have. But funny enough, I did OD a little bit on some methyl B12 because I have a B12, I have pernicious anemia. Well, had. I got rid of it, even though they say you can't. But then I took a turn again because my ANA went positive again. So I did a little too much of the spray because I started to feel good and I had some energy. And then my B12 went through the roof when I got blood tested. I was like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have squirted so many times. So,
Well, you raised a couple of important points there. One is most physicians are taught medicine for the average. So your friends requesting a list of all the supplements that you're taking and assuming that they also apply to them, that's the way that medicine approaches these things, right?
true.
Like depression, take a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Whereas what is much better is to personalize and to do experiments, N of one experiments like you've done,
Hmm.
to be able to figure out what's going to work for you versus what's going to work for your friend. The other thing you mentioned is getting autoimmune disease in remission, which I see all the time. There's some conditions that are too far gone that are hard to reverse, but remission is possible.
Oh, I'm so
And
happy for you to say that. I feel like a lot of people are committed to their disease and because it might require work or because they just believe what the doctors say. Like doctors have looked me in the eye. They're like, no, you can't get rid of it. I go, have you seen my B12 levels for this entire year? They were perfect. And I didn't take any supplementation. That was when I had it in remission. Now, like I said, my ANA went positive again. It had gone negative. They told me
Yes.
that was impossible too. The type 1
Yes.
diabetes, I got to a place where I didn't even need to take insulin
Yes.
until they severed the pancreas. And so I'm working my way back. I know I'm going to
Yeah.
get there.
So I want to talk about ANA for a moment because when I was the chief medical officer of a health tech company, we ran testing on about 1,000 employees, and we found that about 30% of them had positive anti-nuclear antibodies. 30%. And these are mostly healthy people, employees. Mark Hyman, a friend of mine, who is running this lab, Function Health, has found that out of 100,000 people that have gotten their blood drawn, mostly healthy people like you and me, 30% of them have positive anti-nuclear antibodies.
Hmm.
I used to have positive anti-nuclear antibodies. And the conventional medical thinking is that once you have them, you always have them. You're making antibodies against the nucleus of your cell, and maybe it'll lead to autoimmune disease in the future. We don't know, but there's nothing you can do about it. And like you, I was able to reverse it and make them negative. So I really believe in this innate intelligence of the body that when you give it the right things and you remove the things that are not working,
Mm-hmm.
especially survival mode, especially foods that are not nourishing, it's possible to reverse these conditions.
What did you do to reverse your ANA?
Well, I followed the protocol that's in my book, The Autoimmune Cure. So I went on an elimination diet, not just, a short-term one, but a really rigorous elimination diet. I addressed leaky gut, and these are, we'll get to like the three legs of the stool that you have to have for an autoimmune disease. And then I did psychedelic-assisted therapy.
Wait, what?
So that, so I, for, let me back up for a second. In order to develop autoimmune disease, you need three things. You need to have genetic predisposition, you need to have leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability, and then you need a trigger. And the trigger for some people is trauma. The trigger for some people is infection, like the virus that causes COVID.
Or COVID? Yeah, that's what happened with me. And I mean, I heard even a statistic in the 70s now, but I heard initially 42% of people ended up with diabetes after COVID, whether it was from the shot or from actually getting it.
Yeah, we're seeing the rise of autoimmunity. The rates are escalating, and we think part of that is related to the pandemic. Um, the virus, the vaccine, it could also be the loneliness and the isolation of sheltering in place, which we know is associated with autoimmunity. So that trigger is really important. And for some women, because women are 4 out of 5 people with autoimmune disease, it's hormonal. It's being pregnant and postpartum. That's a really common time for your thyroid to stop working. It could also be perimenopause. That's when I often will diagnose a woman with multiple sclerosis or celiac or type 1 diabetes or Hashimoto's,
Type 1 even?
even type 1. So
Really?
this is adult onset versus onset in childhood. But
Wow.
the interesting thing about these three factors, the genetics, leaky gut, and a trigger, is that you can do something about the latter too. You can address the leaky gut. So elimination diet is one of the ways that you can address leaky gut. Another thing you can do is to take L-glutamine. And then you can address the trigger. So that's what I did. I'm someone who's never taken any drugs until I turned 50. And then I started to see the data on MDMA assisted therapy and how it helps to resolve trauma. And it works twice as well as talk therapy or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So that's what got me to write this new book, because I saw this in my patients as well. It's not just me reversing my ANA, but I found that by addressing and resolving, turning volume down on my trauma, I was able to completely changed my physiology.
Wow. Yeah, controlling the controllables, right? Like you can't change your genetic makeup. We come back. I'm going to take a quick break. I want to know a little bit more about the MDMA and a little bit more of the elimination diet, exactly how you did it, and how others can as well. We'll be right back. We are back. So let's do elimination diet first. I want to know how you did it and what you were looking for in terms of reversing your ANA.
So I've been taking people through elimination diets for about 30 years. I think they're incredibly powerful. They were first studied in autoimmune disease about 30 years ago. So the way that I walk people through it is we eliminate all at once the foods that are most likely to trigger the immune system in the gut. So that's gluten, dairy, nightshades, things like peppers, tomatoes, eggplant. Those are the things that are the most triggering with autoimmune disease. And so I eliminate those.
Even feta
Typically,
cheese?
well,
Isn't feta just better?
I know you're Greek, and I understand
I've
that
kept
feta is
feta, but
very
I'm like,
important
do
to
I need
you.
to cut feta? Shit.
So, the idea here is that you're trying to create a blank slate. You're
Mm.
trying to support your immune system in every possible way. The food that you love the most, like feta, often is causing problems.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is that you go off for 3 weeks and then you start to add foods back one at a time. And you take your time here. You don't eat pizza with, the tomatoes and the cheese and the gluten all at once. You add maybe goat feta back or sheep feta, and you see for 4 days how you respond to it. You track your immune system. You look at, how tight are your rings? How's your mood? Do you have any aches in your joints? So that's how I do an elimination diet. You do elimination for 3 weeks, and then you do provocation once you have a clean slate. So one food at a time, watch for 4 days.
So basically, protein and vegetables.
Protein and vegetables, and you can get super creative. One of the things we know is so good for the microbiome, and your microbiome is so important for your immune system, is to get about 25 to 35 different vegetables and fruits every week. That's a lot. That usually requires going to either Erewhon or, a farmer's market so
Yeah.
that you can try these different foods and do it along with the kind of uh, meats that are the healthiest, wild game, wild caught fish. I'm
Which
from
is
Alaska,
so
so
hard to find now. Even
it
like at a
is.
Whole Foods, even at Erewhon, I was in Erewhon and it was all farm raised salmon. I'm like, my God, guys.
Yeah, I order it from Alaska because I just think it's the best up there. So there's, if you Google fresh wild caught fish, salmon, halibut, cod from Alaska, I think that's the best source.
Okay.
The waters are cleaner.
I'm realizing now why my ANA went positive again.
What happened? What happened?
I was queen elimination diet nonstop. It wasn't just a 3 week thing because I was trying to heal the diabetes again. So I was eating no sugar, like not even a berry. I was eating so clean, and then I was having all these liver issues, and they found all these liver lesions. And when I was reading up on the liver, realizing how much it does need some glucose, just like the brain,
Yes.
I was like, wait, maybe what got me to Egypt isn't going to get me to the promised land. Maybe what worked the first time, my body's different. I don't have a spleen. I don't have part of the pancreas. Maybe I need to give my body a break. So I gave my body a break, and I went back to having a little bit of sourdough and even some dark chocolate, and some dairy. I kind of just, all of that stuff kind of came back in. Now I'm pretty clean, but I think that's why the ANA went positive.
It could be. I mean, the way that you know is to do the experiment. So if you add those foods back one at a time, all of which are super healthy foods, but if you do it one at a time, tracking for 4 days, and maybe tracking some of the blood work along the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's how you do the experiment to figure out what could be triggering you.
Yeah. Really fascinating, though, and really, I just love having another person, especially a Harvard grad and MIT grad, telling us that you can put these in remission and you can do it, because I think a lot of people just give up because conventional doctors tell you it's not possible. So let's talk a little bit about trauma and how trauma is leading to these as well, because yes, part of it is genetic makeup and the triggers, but how does the trauma kind of fold in here officially?
Trauma's really interesting. I feel like it's become more topical. I'm really glad that we're talking about it more. What we know is that it's not so much what happened to you, it's the way that the trauma lives on in your body. And that means that the big T trauma, things like a genocide or a near fatal car accident, that can affect you. It can affect your pine network, your psychology, your immune system, your nervous system, and the way you regulate, and also your endocrine system. But small T trauma can too. And so this is more what I see every day in my clients, women who are in their 30s and 40s, and they're just pushed to the max. They're trying to be all things in different aspects of their lives. Maybe they're a journalist and they're on the Today Show, and they are just pushing really hard because they want to be of service. They want to, make the world a better place. But it can backfire. And these small T traumas, like a relationship that's not a sanctuary, that's not fully supportive, eating foods that don't work for you, having a conflict with someone else that you love. Like I had a problem with one of my family members, and it was really distressing for me. So, trauma is something that becomes embedded. It has a signature in the body, and it can cause dysregulation. And it depends in the pine network kind of where your vulnerability is. So, you talked about a friend, for instance, who committed suicide. I would assume that in your friend, that psychology of the pine network was especially vulnerable. In my own case, my immune system is vulnerable to trauma. So I developed anti-nuclear antibodies. And that kind of pre-autoimmunity can exist for 7 to 14 years before it becomes an autoimmune disease. I also had issues with my endocrine system. I also have issues with my autonomic nervous system, kind of that automatic part of your body. But you can measure that with your heart rate variability, which I check with a ring every day. So it depends on how this trauma lives on in your body. That then sets you up to address it, to measure the way the signature exists in your body, and then to figure out what's going to work the best for you. For some people, it's talk therapy. So about 30% of people go to a trauma-informed therapist and they get better. But then there's the other 70% who do not get better. And so to me, that's not a great solution. That it should not be the gold standard.
Well, and you
Whereas we
said
know,
certain people with, was it high or low cortisol, won't respond to talk therapy as well.
so people who've got inflammation
Oh, yeah.
don't respond as well to talk therapy. And so they often need more of a lifestyle-based approach.
Is that because of the brain fog?
We think it's related to that. I mean, this is a theory of depression. It's called the chronic inflammatory theory of depression, where the immune system is overactivated, and it does seem to cause, it's related to disruption of the gut barrier and also the blood-brain barrier. And so it leads to more inflammation in the brain, and it can also lead to brain fog.
Wow.
And then when you look, Maria, at the data that was starting to come out several years ago on MDMA assisted therapy for trauma, we know that about 70% of people resolve their symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder with 2 to 3 treatments of MDMA assisted therapy. So that's
Wow.
what gets me excited. And of course, the pharmaceutical companies don't like this because we're talking about 2 to 3 sessions And then a year later, you're still better. They've got durable effects. It's very different than the model of taking an SSRI every day for years on end.
Let's take a quick break. I want to ask a little bit more about how the MDMA works because I'm scared of drugs, but I want to know more. But before we do that, friends, Macy's is running their VIP sale. It's just around the corner, running from September 26th through October 7th. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. You can get an extra 30% off all the latest fall styles and your favorite brands. And that's not all. You can also get 15% off of makeup, fragrances, and beauty tools. I think it's a perfect time, of course, to refresh your fall necessities, but I think early holiday shopping, guys. You want to have a stress-free holiday? Take advantage of this 30% off. Buy your perfume for your best friend or your favorite pair of jeans for yourself, whatever it is. Don't wait. Head over to Macy's. Grab these amazing deals before they're gone. If you guys need some inspo, you can check my Macy's wish list. I'm wearing a pair of my cute jeans right now that are on there from Free People that I'm loving. But I have so many things that I picked out there that you guys are going to love for you, your friends, your family, and so on and so forth. So happy shopping. Also, if you're looking for a snack while you're shopping, these are my favorite go-to snacks. You know it. Wonderful pistachios. They're delicious. They're good for you. They're my go-to quick snack when I need a little satiation. Sometimes I'm in between things and running around and I don't have enough time to stop. So they are in my bag. They don't melt. They don't make a mess, and they are delicious. They come in great flavors, whether it's the roasted salted or the sweet chili, which I love. You will find one that you love as well. They're satisfying. They're guilt-free. Head over to wonderfulpistachios.com and stock up on your favorite flavors. Okay, speaking of favorite flavors, does MDMA taste good? Is it a drug that tastes? I'm kidding.
So most people take it as a capsule. And, right now it's not FDA approved for trauma. It got turned down by the FDA in August. And, we're trying to make this available, especially for people with trauma, especially people who suffer with post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm thinking, especially here of veterans and first responders who have a really high suicide rate. So you don't really taste it. The way the medicine works is that it leads to a sudden release of serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. And so it creates euphoria, which is why people take it as a party drug, but I'm not talking about it for recreational use here. I'm talking about it in the context of a therapeutic container where you've got a very well-trained therapist or someone who's providing the treatment who knows how to provide it safely and knows how to create this container that allows you to access your innate healing capacity. So we know that this medicine helps with the fear response. So it gets the amygdala in the brain, that part of the brain that's always looking for
The
threat
monster.
on the horizon, right? I have a hot amygdala, so I know a lot about the
I
amygdala.
know. Oh my God, we're sounding like soul sisters here. I swear.
Yes. Yes. So
my amygdala is always looking for the monster.
right. And
Yeah.
so this medicine helps the amygdala just kind of settle down. And it lets you go back to some of these traumatic memories that you might have as a child or an adult, and allows you to reconstruct your narrative so that you don't have that signature that continues in the body. And what's important to realize here, Maria, is that the part of the brain that understands what happened to you, the part of your brain, in my case, I've got an adverse childhood experience score of 6. So I had a lot of stuff that went down as a kid. And the part of the brain that understands this, that you go over and over and over again in talk therapy, is different from the part of the brain where the trauma is lodged. So you can't really talk or think your way into resolving the trauma. I mean, some people can, but that's only about 30%. The rest of us need a way to resolve the trauma in the brain and in the body. And that's potentially what psychedelic medicine can do.
Did you try somatic therapy or EMDR before you did this?
I did. So I did several years of EMDR going back to my 30s. And I know it's really helpful for a lot of people. It's not something that helped to resolve my trauma. But I think you're making an important point, which is Since we can't think our way 70% of the time to resolve our trauma, we need to have these somatic based treatments. So, EMDR is one example. There's also somatic experiencing. There are, yoga can help you. Trauma informed yoga can be very helpful. So, there are ways of increasing your somatic awareness of how to regulate yourself, how you become dysregulated, but maybe by things that remind you of the trauma. And I think that's really important in terms of healing.
Don't mind me. I have a high blood sugar. I get a treat here. So with the MDMA, because I'm terrified of drugs, you said you have to have a trained therapist and you have to have somebody that is going to provide a container for you. I would be terrified that I'd get addicted to the euphoria. How do you not get addicted?
It's a good question. So I was terrified as well. I never took Molly when I was, in college or in my 20s
Is
or
that
30s.
MDMA?
That's MDMA
Okay.
or ecstasy X. I never even smoked weed. So I was a total square until I started to see this data and I realized, oh my gosh, it's more dangerous to drink alcohol than it is to take these medications. It's more dangerous to ride a horse than it is to take MDMA assisted therapy or ketamine, which is FDA approved, or psilocybin, which we hope will become FDA approved at some point in the future.
Do you
So
feel
these medicines
equally
are really
strong
safe.
about those others, or do you feel like the MDMA is the best?
The MDMA has the largest randomized trials in terms of helping with trauma.
Okay.
Psilocybin's not far behind, ketamine's not far behind. So I would say, by whatever means possible that is safe and you've got a good therapeutic container.
Wow. So you did a couple of sessions, you said, and it healed you? And it
With
lasts?
with MDMA assisted therapy, I did about 8 sessions with a psychologist. And I think if you can work with the same person over time, someone who can really get to know you and know your stories and your narrative and your challenges and your blocks, that can be very helpful. So I did it the first 3 times, similar to what has been studied in the randomized trials that have been published in Nature with people with post traumatic stress disorder. I don't have PTSD, but I have partial PTSD. I've got, some of the aspects, the hypervigilance, the difficulty sleeping. And I see that a lot in my patients. You may not have PTSD, but you might have a smaller version of it. So, what I found was that the first 3 sessions were incredibly helpful. And then I decided, really in the first session, that I wanted to be able to offer this to my clients. And so I became certified in the administration of psilocybin, ketamine, and MDMA. And as a result of becoming certified, I also wanted to experience it on a deeper level. So I continued past those first 3 sessions.
And what did you find?
I found that I no longer have those ways that I was tied to the past. I no longer live in survival mode, which I think was driving my positive anti nuclear antibody, as well as my chronic cortisol problems. So my cortisol is now normal. My ANA tested negative after I did those first 3 sessions. And, I'm not out of the woods. I still have vulnerability, but I would say that the experiences of my past, this A score of 6, adverse childhood experiences, no longer lives in my present the way it once did.
Wow.
And I want to be somewhat cautious about this. I don't want to be cavalier because it's not yet FDA approved. And so the best place to do some of these treatments is to work above ground, to work in a research setting. And we now have research settings all over UCLA, UC San Francisco, Johns Hopkins, NYU. So if you want to learn more about it, I would recommend 2 things. Number one, be part of a research setting to get these medicines safely. And number two, help us get MDMA FDA approved.
Wow. This has been so informative. I feel like, A, you just reminded me why my ANA went positive, and now I know my road back. But B, definitely something to think about with the MDMA, because like life is short, and to have your traumas run your life and your emotional states is just not fun, because it's not just your emotional state, it's your physical state then too. And I'm not going to be as annoyed when I take the cortisol tests. I'm going to be very, very excited for my cortisol tests. And I'm just really grateful that you're spreading this message. I think that we need more conventional trained doctors explaining the positive and negatives of that world, because it's just like any other world. Nobody's perfect. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that doctors are trained by a system that's underwritten by the pharmaceutical companies. And so they don't even know. Most of them don't even realize. And by the way, the system is so hedged against doctors because they're put in a position to have to accrue an insane amount of debt just to get to where they want to be and become a doctor. And then when the incentive packages roll in for prescribing medication, what are they going to do? They have to pay their medical bills.
It's true. I mean, it's a shameful situation, and I hope it changes. But in the meantime, I feel like your message about becoming CEO of your own health is so critical. So don't outsource it. You need to claim this for your own.
Yeah. So, doctor, you are still seeing patients, right? You're in the Bay Area. If
I do.
somebody wanted to find you and work with you, how would they do that?
Yes, you can go to my website, which is SaraGottfriedMD.com. I went through a divorce a couple of years ago, so that's changing to SaraZalMD.com. I'm on social media, Instagram, lots of ways to reach out to us.
Okay, so Gabby's in the engineer booth. She's going to make sure we put all of that inside the description of this episode so you can find Dr. Szal easily. Thank you so much. I feel like this is just the beginning. I feel like we're going to have so many more cool episodes ahead. And we'll also put links to your books because I did not have them for this, and I wish I did. And now I'm going to have to go back and read everything too.
Thank you so much, Maria. So great to be with you.
So great to be with you.
This podcast and all related content published or distributed by or on behalf of Maria Menounos or MariaMenounos.com is for informational purposes only and may include information that is general in nature and that is not specific to you. Any information or opinions expressed or contained herein are not intended to serve as or replace medical advice, nor to diagnose, prescribe, or treat any disease, condition, illness, or injury, and you should consult the healthcare professional of your choice regarding all matters concerning your health, including before beginning any exercise, weight loss, or healthcare program. If you have or suspect you may have a healthcare emergency, please contact a qualified healthcare professional for treatment. Any information or opinions provided by a guest expert or host featured within website or on company's podcast are their own, not those of Maria Menounos or the company. Accordingly, Maria Menounos and the company cannot be responsible for any results or consequences or actions you may take based on information or opinions.